Hello everyone, Sandra here, and welcome to my life and channel update for February of 2026. I look a little fuzzy in the camera to me, but whatever. We're going to keep rolling. So this month has seen a number of different things going on. Probably the most notable is I've been playing Dragon Quest XI. I had played that for kind of a while around the start of the year. But then got sidetracked with stuff, so I got back to playing it this month, and I've been having a lot of fun with it. The game really feels like an adventure to me. It's hard for me to figure out exactly why. I've been thinking about it a good bit, and I think I've talked about this before. And there's just this sense of the way that it's structured feels that way. And some amount of it might be stuff that I'm bringing to it. I think part of it is it feels like there's times where it kind of like slows down and lets you contemplate a little bit. With like campsites with your party where you can talk to everyone. I don't know. There's something about it that continues to capture that feeling of an adventure. So I'm making progress through it. I have no idea how far through I am. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about what I've encountered, but I've been having a lot of fun with it. There's definitely some things about the combat system that I'm still kind of wrapping my head around, like stat changing moves, like increased defense, increased offense, decreases, etc., are a lot more powerful than I was giving them credit for, I suppose I could say. And the option of being able to change equipment in combat, like it doesn't take a turn or anything to swap your equipment around, but like there's some properties that you might want that you would then not have if you swap to something else temporarily or whatever. But it's really like it's a good example of that. Maybe you have a sword and shield and you swap to a great sword, and that means your defensive capabilities decrease. Yeah, as an example, until it's your turn again and you can swap again. But it's got a lot of a bit more depth than I realized. One of the things that I really appreciate is the way it handles area of effect moves. This is something that I've struggled with when working in RPG Maker MV, where moves that hit all enemies are usually the best choice because you're making more efficient use of your turn. But with the way that those sorts of things work in Dragon Quest XI, is it's by enemy type. So like, as a hypothetical example, let's say you run into a group of enemies that is like 3 giant rats and 2 dire wolves. This is not actually an encounter that you might have, but you know, it's that idea, right? If you use most area of effect moves, you'll have to select if you are attacking the rats or the wolves. You can't attack all of them. There's like one spell that I've run into that affects all of them, but otherwise it's usually by category. And this means that groups of enemies that are more diverse are naturally resistant to area of effect moves, which I think is really interesting. The game also does a good job of not giving you too many mana restoring items. That's something that can be a problem. Now, it does completely invalidate healing items, or not completely, but mostly invalidate healing items. Healing items are pretty clunky to use. There's a button that you can use in the menu to just use magic to heal everyone up. There's basically no reason you're going to use healing items out of like the first little bit of the game. There's maybe some later spots where you might use them a little bit. Some of the ones that can clear up status ailments can be more useful, but just restoring HP, it's like I've had these healing herbs languishing in my inventory for ages because why would I use them over spells that are free? But the fact that they don't give you a whole lot of MP restoring items means that you do want to use like inns or campsites or other resting spots in order to be able to restore your MP, your mana or whatever. I forget exactly what they call it, but it's that idea. And being able to restore that is like a limited thing. So being able to, like, you can't just buy MP restoring items in shops. It's a little like Pokemon in that regard, where it's like, oh, I guess I need to go use the Pokemon Center. because my move resources are running out. But yeah, so those are some random thoughts on it. I've also spent some amount of time this month reading She Professed Herself Pupil of the Wise Man, up through book 12. But like that's where I'm at right now. 13 through 15 are out, and 16 comes out in May. So anyway, I've been really enjoying the series. It's definitely not going to be to everyone's tastes. The basic premise, for those who are unfamiliar, there is an anime version, or they're not like of the whole story or anything. It's like maybe the first couple books, like they usually are. But there's like a one season of an anime based on it. But the basic premise is that there's a summoner who named himself Danbolf, and he like it's an MMO, and it's one of those in the line of like MMOs that suddenly everybody ends up in a real version of it. So he's one of the 9 wise men, the preeminent mages of the kingdom of Alkite, and like experts in their field. So he's the expert in summoning, and like there's a cash store, and it's like, well, the only thing that I can get with this is a vanity case that lets you change your appearance, and fiddles around with it and like makes his idealized female form as kind of like a lark just to see what he could do, and then like falls asleep inside the VR thing and wakes up as that changed character. So it's like, oh, can't call yourself Danbolf anymore because you don't look anything like him, because he is like, your typical old man sorcerer appearance, and then this is like, a young woman. So this is Shenanigans and Adventures, and that's why She Professed Herself Pupil of the Wise Man, because like, what is my excuse for being able to like knowing all of my tricks is like, he taught me. Yeah, that we'll go with that. But it's been fun and cozy. But like I said, definitely not going to be up everyone's alley. But I enjoyed reading a bunch of that this past month. I also read That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime, book 22, which is on the bookshelf directly behind me. I'm going to take a moment to talk a little bit about that series. I don't know. You know what? Here's what I'm going to do. I want to talk about the series a little bit. That's potentially going to get into some spoiler territory, so I'm just going to save that for the end of this and talk about it then. I think that makes sense. Let's see. Another big thing that I actually did this month was catch up on Jujutsu Kaisen, which has been a really interesting. I've been watching the anime. I'm probably behind by like an episode now, but I had caught up earlier this month. Very interesting thematically. So just to give kind of a cursory rundown without getting into it too much, there's a very Japanese spiritual idea that negative emotions that people build leak out of them in some way, or functionally like pollute the world, and that when they stagnate, they become evil spirits, or they can become evil spirits. It's kind of a Japanese idea of spirituality. It's a way of trying to understand the effects of sin on the world, and process that. Like, why do bad things happen? Well, because bad things happen to people, or their negative emotions then filter out to become things that cause more bad things to happen to people. Kind of a self-reinforcing thing. There's a lot that you can unpack with that sort of concept, but you see this idea, this base idea, crop up a good bit in Japanese media, because of course it does. I mean, it's part of, like, when you're making Western stuff, you're going to be inadvertently borrowing all sorts of things from your culture, because that's just how it works. It's unavoidable, right? Or if you're avoiding it, you're intentionally avoiding it, I should say. You're being very conscious and very aware of it, and then doing your best to avoid it. And that's an entirely different discussion. That's not what the point I'm talking about here. Jujutsu Kaisen uses this idea of these negative emotions as developing curse energy is how the subtitles translate it, and that energy leaks out of people and then becomes animated curses that then some people can see, but most people can't, and they cause all sorts of chaos and destruction. And so the Jujutsu sorcerers are people who have learned how to harness their own curse energy that they produce in order to be able to use it to fight curses. Is a rough summary of how the structure of things works. And so we're following somebody who is able to, like, ends up developing into a Jujutsu sorcerer and enters into their society and kind of sees how things are going. But stuff goes sideways real fast, and they have a lot of... It's in many regards, a very tragic show. And it, like, on the... Like, there's a couple of different layers of things I thought that were really interesting, just thematically. So without going into it too much, you have, like, I'm not going to be talking plot points too much or anything like that, but just from a thematic level, there's the primary stuff with our main character, who is, like, he wants to try to help people, he wants to save people, and he has to deal with the fact that he can't save everyone. And that's something that a number of the characters have to wrestle with. But it's like, how do you carry on when your friends and mentors are dying and you couldn't save them, and it feels like you can't protect anything? And you're like, I thought I had strength, but I don't have as much strength as I thought. And so there's a lot of interesting stuff going on thematically with that, of like, how is this main character going to push forward and try to continue to help people to try to stop this when it's clearly way beyond the scope of what he can handle. And I think there's some really interesting stuff to contemplate there, just with, like, we all confront the limits of our own power. Like, as human beings, we have a certain amount of power, but it's not really that much individually. And, like, how are we going to deal with the evil in the world that harms people when we don't really have that much power to confront it, and it feels like it's insurmountable? And there's a lot to kind of contemplate with that. The other thing, though, that I thought was really interesting is some of its the way that it's confronting certain political powers, I guess, is the best way of describing it, but there's two different types. There's frequent references to the upper, what do they call them? The top brass, the upper echelons or whatever. I forget the exact phrases that they use in the sub, but basically, like, you barely see any of the people in charge, but they get referenced pretty regularly. And it's seems clear that there's some very powerful factions within the Jujutsu society that are maybe more concerned about maintaining their own power and position of authority than actually helping people. And that's kind of a thing that crops up kind of regularly, of, like, they just want to maintain a status quo that's beneficial to them, even if that leaves people overall worse off. So, like, that's kind of a theme of, like, how much damage that causes, that clearly feels like a reference to things that we see in the, real world. There's also, kind of as a counterpoint to that, is, so family can be pretty significant in Japanese culture, from the things that I've observed anyway. I mean, like, names are family name first, then personal name, right? Whereas in, like, a lot of the English-speaking world, I can't speak to all their cultures entirely, but, it's like you use your first name and then your family name, your surname, or whatever. And so that ordering kind of gives you a little bit of a hint, where there's, and I've seen this theme in, like, other anime too, like Naruto actually has some of this theme going on with Neji and Hinata, that are, like, one's mainline family, like their relationships with their family and stuff like that is complicated. But in Jujutsu Kaisen, there's some very politically powerful families, and one of them comes up quite a bit just due to a number of characters being from it, but kind of alienated in one way or another. And just the impact of that, and the way that the family tries to exert control, and the way that, like, the children born to the family exist for the sake of the family, and to bring the family more honor and glory and whatever, and kind of continue on its self, where the people are not entities anymore, the family is. And in the way that crushes people, like that's something that Jujutsu Kaisen is looking at, is the way that sort of dynamic, the weight that it places on people and whatnot. So I thought some of those things were really interesting to think about as I was watching a great deal of it. Let's see, a few other things that I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk some about, let's see. I mean, the streams have been going just fine overall. Viewership varies. I need to remember to try to update settings to try to improve quality. Just glancing over my notes here of things. I think the next thing that I kind of want to talk about is Magic the Gathering, because I've been doing some drafts of Lorwyn Eclipsed. So I kind of want to talk about this. I did talk about it on Blue Sky a little bit. But Lorwyn Eclipsed, first of all, I have yet to wrap my head around the draft format. I mean, I'm only drafting it once a week at my local game store, so not a whole lot, but it feels very perplexing to me. This happens sometimes, where just sometimes the draft format just does not click. And what my problem is I'm not sure how to prioritize things. Now, I haven't been going around looking at other like draft videos or anything else on it either. So it's not like I've been trying to study up on the format or anything. But, when I'm looking through a pack, I'm like, okay, what's good here? What will indicate to me what archetypes I should be trying to go towards and stuff like that. It reminds me a little bit of, slightly indirectly, of Outlaws of Thunder Junction. I had this weird problem because they had the crime mechanic, which was like, if you targeted something of your opponent's this turn, and targeting stuff is just like such normal vocabulary for Magic that it just, I don't process it as like something I need to be paying special attention to. So I had a really hard time making sure I was picking up enough crime enablers when drafting Outlaws of Thunder Junction. But I keep wanting to kind of go like Vivid, and like when should I be moving and trying to move into the typal thing, Kindred, whatever we're calling it these days, like the kin, elves or goblins or whatever. When should I be prioritizing what's a sign that this is something that I should be moving into? It's been baffling to me, and I've been really struggling to figure the set out, I feel like. But there's something else I want to talk about it, which is what I talked about in Blue Sky, which is it doesn't feel like Lorwyn or Shadowmoor to me a lot. Like, mechanically, it's kind of doing an okay job of it, but when I think of Lorwyn and Shadowmoor, like, there's a number of different things that kind of are going on, but basically, I started playing in 2007 about the time Lorwyn came out. So Lorwyn, Morningtide, Shadowmoor, and Eventide were like the first sets that were coming out when I started playing. And I dipped a lot into Time Spiral Block, Ravnica Block. A lot of fondness for those as well. Time Spiral Block was a great crash course on the history of Magic, both mechanically and narratively and stuff. So I have a huge soft spot for Time Spiral Block. But Lorwyn and Shadowmoor were the blocks that were first coming out when I first started playing, and we haven't been back until now. And so I was really excited to go back, and then it's like, this is not triggering my nostalgia, like, at all. Very, very minimally. And it's like, that's really disappointing to me. And I think there's something, like, as I've been thinking about it, I think there's some mechanical things that have really contributed to it. Primarily in the realm of colors, just because they shifted what colors the types were in between Lorwyn and Shadowmoor. So, like, a Lorwyn goblin is black-red, and a Shadowmoor one is red-green. Right? And that sort of thing, there you can go through all the major types and see how that happened. Like, the elves, a black Shadowmoor elf feels wrong because they are green-white. right? But they were green-black in Lorwyn. So that sort of thing is like throwing me off a lot more than I think I kind of initially realized it was. But there's a lot of color palette stuff that also just is really throwing me off a lot. And so I looked at like the basic lands and those sorts of things. And the other thing that also like is not helping is I expected more evoke, and I think the evoke cycle that they have at Mythic is really cool. I like the design space that they're exploring with those. I think that's a really neat design space of using hybrid mana and then saying, okay, you get this effect if you spend these colors and this effect if you spend these colors. So if you evoke it, you can only get one of its effects, but if you cast the full thing, you can get both. But if you had asked me before the set came out, do you think Muldrifter is going to be in Lorwyn Eclipsed? I would have said yes. Do you think there's going to be a Shriekmaw variant? I would have said yes. Like, I was expecting Evoke to come back. And it in a more substantial way. And I think maybe an uncommon cycle would have done it for me, like an uncommon cycle in each color. But it does not feel like Lorwyn and Shadowmoor to me from a number of different angles. And like probably the biggest thing is I think they use it for like the liminal zone between Lorwyn and Shadowmoor. But and I think these basics that are not the full art ones, like this Plains, this Plains is like my least favorite piece of art in the set. Not because I think it's a bad piece of art, but because it doesn't, like, this part up here feels like Edge of Eternities. This part down here feels like Avishkar. Because Avishkar had all of these swirls and stuff in the landscapes. Like, there's all sorts of swirls in it. So whenever I see those, like, swirls, and I don't know how well you can see on this, but you can see all of this like, swirling patterns going on here. That feels like Avishkar. So this feels like Edge of Eternities crashing into Avishkar to me, and not like Lorwyn at all. And then there's just like other random color palette stuff. Like Lorwyn is very green, and so like the full art Lorwyn Plains is very yellow, and it's like that doesn't look like Lorwyn. Shadowmoor is very yellow, and so like when I see this card, this art on Keep Out is very blue, and I'm like, no, that should be more yellow or gray. And I was like, this color palette just feels off, and it's like I don't think there's generally like bad art or anything. I think the artist did fine jobs overall. But I don't like the art direction. And I think that's also a big contributor to sort of the feel. So maybe I'll link the Blue Sky thread in the description if you want to go check out me deep diving into it too much. There's some other stuff too, like the changelings don't feel quite right. Too many beaks. It's a weird complaint to have, but I don't know. A lot of it is, and I don't think it's necessarily bad. It's just it doesn't trigger my nostalgia the way that I was hoping a return to Lorwyn would. I wanted it to feel like I was coming back to Lorwyn and Shadowmoor when I heard that that's what we were doing, and I don't feel like I got that. And to be back for the first time and not have and feel like my nostalgia is largely like not been hit is very disappointing. I do think there's a number of mechanical things. Like I think Blight and Vivid do a good job of feeling like Shadowmoor mechanics, and of course they have the typal themes. I would like Wizards of the Coast to figure out a black-green thing to do besides self-mill, because I feels like that comes up all the friggin' time. I mean, not always. Wilds of Eldraine had the food thing going on with them and stuff too, but it feels like it's the default is graveyard shenanigans, and it's like okay, but maybe we can do something else for a little bit and create some. A lot of it is magic sets when they keep repeating the same themes within colors. It starts to make magic sets feel like they blend together, and that's a little frustrating. Okay, so I think there's a few other things to talk about. Projects I'm working on. So I think I've mentioned that I've been working on a book, a fiction novel, whatever we want to call these things, a story. And I'm making really good progress on it. I'm getting pretty close to finishing my first draft. So, like, I say first draft, but it's like, I've written the initial all of the words, and then I'm going to need to go back and like do edits and revisions and stuff or whatever might need to happen. But it'll be nice to have that first thing done. Once I finish that, I'm going to take a short break from working on it to work on my NeoCities website because there's some stuff that I want to do there. And then I'm going to come back and begin working on those edit passes. I just want a little bit of time, a little bit of distance. I think that's helpful for processing stuff. But I'm happy with how that's been coming together. Hopefully, once I finish it, which is a long process, but hopefully it's something that people will be able to enjoy. That is my hope, that people enjoy it and it'll get people to think. Those are the things that I want from it. I mean, that's something that I appreciate about books that I read, is when I enjoy them and they give me something to think about. I also have a project that I think I've mentioned this a couple times that I've been working on with a college friend that's progressing nicely. So that's also exciting. So, okay, that's enough talking about all those random things. I'm going to talk about that time I got reincarnated as slime, just kind of an overview of a lot of the way that it's kind of plotted and structured and some of the stuff and thoughts that I have about that. So if that's not something you're interested in, this is a great time to head out. And if so, I do thank you for watching. Those who want to stick around, I'm going to get some water first. Let me hold hydration. Okay, so that time I got reincarnated as a slime. It's currently, there are 23 books, I believe, in the series out in Japan, but 22 just recently came out. And I read it this past month. And I've been thinking a lot about the series as a result. So, the basics is a guy gets reincarnated as a slime. So slime is a basic type of monster common in fantasy stories. And he's figuring out his way in the world. A lot of the meta structure of the story can be roughly broken into what I consider two main parts. The first part runs through about book 13 or 14. I'd have to review them to see exactly where it is, where I'd want to draw the line. There's a little bit of messiness in where I draw the line. But the first part of it is very much so concerned with like politics and nation building. So you have our main character of Rimuru Tempest, who is setting up his nation of monsters. And wants to get along with humanity. I mean, he's a former human. And you have sort of the way he's interacting with and negotiating with those individuals. Now, at the time of this recording, the anime goes through book 9, I want to say. And there's a lot of different things that go on over the course of it. And there's a lot of combat and a lot of fighting, but a lot of it is in service of something happened and Rimuru is trying to protect his people, or usually that. Usually that's what's going on. But it feels like the emphasis is on what are the relationships we're establishing with the surrounding nations, where's our place in the world, how do we get political standing, all sorts of things related to that. And then we hit, I forget exactly where it is. It's in that like 13-ish area, give or take a book, which is where it's a little bit harder to draw the line. But we get the war with the Empire. This might be like, it's one of the nations that's kind of nearish by, but is like, it's kind of been in the background. It's the Eastern Empire. A lot of the first dozen books or so are dealing with stuff in the West. So you have the Forest of Jura in the middle, and then to the west are the Western nations. The Forest of Jura is where the Nation of Monsters are that Rimuru runs. And to the east, you get to the Eastern Empire. And so a lot of the first part is dealing with that. And then there's the Eastern Empire is like, okay, now we're going to invade. And so they have their attack, and then that transforms immediately, like afterwards, after that wraps up, into a much larger conflict. So that wraps up, I don't know, somewhere around like book 14 or 15. Probably about 14ish. 13, 14, I don't remember exactly. It's been a little bit since I've read some of those middle ones. But that wraps up, and then transitions into a much greater conflict that then has been going on since then. And so it's a lot of, with the exception of book 17, which is a collection of like side stories, it's been, let's see, 22 to like 15, like 7 books roughly of this big fight, this big like series of battles. Now there's been some like downtime within books, but it's kind of been this big massive war thing that's been going on. And it feels like it kind of drags on. It kind of drags its feet in a lot of spots, in my opinion. So I think the first part of the series is a lot stronger. And this big conflict, while it has a lot of interesting moments, suffers a lot from... Now, this is where I'm going to be very technical, in that I don't know exactly where the source of the problem is. I'm reading an English translation of a Japanese text. Is this a problem that exists in the Japanese text, or is it a problem with English translation and the way that's translating that Japanese text? I could not tell you. But what I can tell you is the problem is a difficulty that the text has with trying to describe the stakes, the odds, the challenges. Somewhere around book 15 or 16, I think it is, there's a power scaling that's introduced. And then immediately, like, every single fight is, here is the relative power levels of the people involved in the fight, but power levels and everything, it doesn't actually tell you how it's going to end. And it feels like a lot of the same language is used over and over and over again of trying to communicate the awe-inspiring vastness of what you're encountering. It's the sort of thing where it's like, this would be communicated much better in a visual medium, a manga or an anime especially, where you have audio to contribute. So it makes me think of like the sequences in Dragon Ball Z, where it's like they're powering up and rocks are floating around them, so much energy is flying from them, and that's how powerful they are, is like the way that they're presenting it. They're able to communicate that in a non-word oriented way, but through images and stuff. And it does a really good job of being able to land sort of that impact of what sort of power levels are we dealing with here. But the author really feels like he struggles a lot, and it's either the author or the translation, really struggles a lot with communicating that sense. And like, this is understandable. This is a challenging problem to try to know how to approach. Feels like a lot of the build up to any given fight is basically like, here is the challenge that they're up against. Here's why it's not a surefire victory one way or another. And here's how it's so mind-blowingly like over the top and atypical. And it's the sort of thing where you can't just say it's inconceivable every single time, because it starts to seem like not true. like these words begin to lose meaning the more you use them, right? So I wasn't, when coming up to book 22, I'm just like, please let this freaking drawn out endless battle come to a close. And it doesn't, but the second half of the book feels significantly stronger than the first half. And it does feel like it's left, like it ends in a spot that I'm excited for book 23, rather than just like, please let this be over now. Those are just my feelings on it. Like, so like in contrast, So I'm Inspired So What has some of the same sort of issues where it's like, okay, how do we convey relative power and things like that? And I think it does a better job. I don't think it's not doing it, like, it's not as fight oriented is one thing. So when you have a lot of battles and it's like before every battle that's trying to convey the magnitude of the fight, before it's even begun. It's like, okay, you're not capturing me here. Like, so I'm a spider, so what? Then what it'll often like, or what it does in some parts, it'll be like, stats don't determine a fight. It's how you use the skills that you also have and your tactics, right? And it's presented as a lesson that the main character is learning, and is like appreciating the significance of, and it doesn't come up a ton. And I think it does a better job too, because it uses almost entirely like first person narrators rather than like Slime will dip into first person narration, but it also like there's a lot of these fight scenes that are more third person narration as they're presented, as I recall. And that has I think you can get better reaction language if it's being framed within the context of an individual rather than trying to do it some other way. So I don't know. It's just something that I really felt is that with that time I got reincarnated as a slime, I think like I overall like the series a good bit, but I do feel like it gets weaker in the post-Empire battle section because it feels so drawn out. Because the thing that I really like about the series is not the fights, it's the nation building and the relationships and those interactions, and seeing how Rimuru just kind of like bumbles his way into being a superpower, basically. And it's like there's a lot of fun there. There's a lot of goofiness. There's a lot of charm. And the focus on combat that is in the latter portion of the series, the last like 40% or whatever, largely lacks that. And it's often Rimuru is absent because I mean it's a little bit of a Superman problem. Rimuru becomes so powerful so quickly that he would quickly like solve all of the problems. So he kind of like has to be punted around. And so like that just creates these it doesn't feel as strong. And like there's still good moments, there's still good bits, but there's a lot of like, okay, but can you describe the stakes and the power levels and these sorts of things in different words this time, please? No? Oh, okay. And so it's like once you get to the actual fight, maybe there's something really cool going on there, but all of the preamble of trying to set up the scene is like the exact same language that was used to set up the previous 14 fights. And it's like, could you maybe vary it up a little bit? And that's the sort of thing that makes it feel weaker. It's not focusing on the parts I like as much, and a lot of the language starts feeling really redundant and repetitive. So it's that, and that's something that I think about in particular as I'm like doing my own writing of a story of like, okay, how do I make sure that I'm presenting things in ways that are variant and that can land and can convey what's going on, and what do these power levels mean, at least in an internal consistency level where like I know what I mean by them. So anyway, that's going to go ahead and wrap things up. I know it's been kind of a longer one of these, but that's because I had things that I wanted to talk about, particularly at the end. So I thank you for everyone who stuck around and hung out for this extended ending. I guess I've done a lot of media analysis this time. That's probably not a bad thing. So until next time, everyone, take care, and thank you for watching. Bye-bye.